All right, we're live with another episode here. This is an awesome guest. He's crushing it. He's going to absolutely take Congress by storm. He's been over there doing great work. I'm really excited to have this guy on and get some input on what's going on in D.C. We got the one and only Congressman Lance Gooden. What's going on?
Well, thank you. You're very kind. Thanks for having me.
Oh, man, I love it. I love it. I love having you on. I've heard so many good things from some people about you and just so much good energy and good vibes. What's going on in D.C. right now, and what has you excited about these campaigns, and what's going on, man?
Well, Corona fear is sweeping the city, so that's the latest. I just learned in the last few minutes that the Democrats are planning to stay here. And Democrats had a meeting earlier in the day, and some were saying we should shutter the doors, and Nancy Pelosi said we are the captains of the ship, and we need to be here and an example, and we need to weather through it. And I cannot believe, you probably didn't expect me to start your show off this way.
No, go ahead.
But I'm about to say this. I agree with Nancy Pelosi, and I think she's right on, and we send a bad message to the rest of the country if we stop working while the rest of America continues to go to work in fear, perhaps. And I think it's important that Congress continue to do their job.
Yeah, no, I like that, man. It's just, honestly, Congress, it's just amazing to see, at least you guys starting to band together on some level, right? So there's hope there.
Yeah.
But, this is really an exciting time. There's so much going on, and there's just, there's Corona, obviously there's that fear. And I think there's some legitimacy to it. There's no doubt. And I know there's been some news and speculation that it's a whipped up together thing, by the media. Where do you stand on it, and how do you feel?
I don't know that it's as whipped up perhaps as some of my colleagues think it may be. I do think that the media is absolutely sensationalizing in some senses. But really, we just don't know how bad it is. It's bad. It seems to be worse in countries that we don't really know a whole lot about, like China and Iran. Who knows how bad it really is there? And then you look at Italy. Italy, it's a wonderful country to visit, but it is about as dysfunctional of a country as exists in Europe. And so it's not really surprising to me that of all the countries in Europe, Italy is the one that can't seem to manage this. But I think we just need to be cautious and prepared. But at the same time, some folks that some of these are my friends. They're just going crazy.
Yeah.
Canceling things long before they need to be canceled. The airlines are hurting. The hotels are hurting. The businesses that rely on any traffic of any just really be in deep trouble. The oil markets are down for various reasons. There's just a lot of uncertainty, and
so much.
I don't know how. I don't know how this ends. It's scary to think about, but I'm going about my business, and I would encourage everyone else to, and just be ready. Don't be foolish.
They canceled in Ohio the fitness show, the Arnold Classic, which is a very large show. They still held portions of the show, but they basically closed it to spectators. Now they're talking about, and everybody's been calling me. I have a text into Jason. We met at NRA Isla. There's talk of the NRA show possibly being canceled. So we don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. And there's like South by Southwest down in Austin. They canceled that, and then the next day the mayor said, well, we can help these businesses that were relying on this festival by going out and spending money. So it's not okay to have people come into town and be in Austin, but it is okay to go out and eat in the restaurants. There's just so many conflicting things that don't make sense to me.
Right.
I've got a buddy that has canceled his wedding that was supposed to be in the Caribbean, and yet he's going to have it at home in Texas. And I'm thinking, what's the difference if we've got a crowd of people in Texas or a crowd of people at a foreign vacation destination? So what? So there's lots of actions I'm seeing people take that some are precautionary and they make sense. Some don't really make sense. But I think people just really don't know what to do. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's perspective.
Just kind of watch the human behavior.
It's just about getting perspective, and I don't think a lot of people have that yet. And there's been talk about Corona obviously affecting countries like Italy very effectively in terms of its transmission, because Italy's like a giant retirement community, right? So the elderly are not responding well to this. They say it's versions of an enhanced flu. It can look like flu-like symptoms. It can cause respiratory problems. So that's obviously something that is insanely easy to catch, and in large crowds. Obviously, they say wash your hands, cover your face. Who can do that all the time, 24 hours a day, right? It's just completely unreasonable. They're saying people are coming down with the flu, but it's really corona, or it's corona and then it's really the flu. So it's getting perspective and getting understanding of what it is and how it's coming to be. But I think we got some really smart scientists out there. I think we'll be on the verge of something that will help mitigate or solve the problem pretty quickly, I hope. Fingers crossed.
I hope you're right. I do hope you're right. And for the sake of industries that we certainly rely on, like the airline industries, we've got to get this under control and move past it, because we can't afford for airlines to go under, and especially in this country where everyone travels, it's just such a part of our lives.
Yeah, I have to go home to Boston in a week's time, and believe me, the ticket was dirt cheap. I mean, they can't give these tickets away now. I was like shocked.
Oh, I know. Now's the time to buy a plane ticket.
Yeah, buy them all.
It's wild. It really is wild.
So you're, a really exciting guest to have on, because you have boots on the ground in the House and around D.C. It's been a really interesting election journey. I've had Kimberly Guilfoyle on a couple times sounding off on it. Of course, I'm in touch with the different campaigns and just had a couple of candidates on. What are you seeing in the climate in D.C. right now with the election going on? Is there a sense that we have a legitimate shot to get the House back?
Yes. I think before this coronavirus hit, the thinking was, if Bernie Sanders is the nominee, then thank goodness, because we as Republicans are going to be in a much better position. However, Democrats, while perhaps foolish, they're not totally stupid. They realize that. And I think they circled the wagons and said, listen, if Bernie Sanders, I was talking with my Democrat colleagues. We walk to the House floor chamber kind of in groups, and we chat no matter what party you're in. And we kind of, I won't say gossip, but we do. Mm-hmm. And I'd say, it's that kind of talk. I'd say to a Democrat, hey, who are you supporting for president? Have you endorsed anyone? And they would say, well, I'm thinking about this, but if Biden's the nominee, I don't know if he messes it up. But if Sanders is, we're all going to lose. So I think everyone has kind of come to the consensus that if Sanders is their nominee, then they're going to struggle in swing House districts. The Democrats are. So Republicans, we were very excited about the prospect of Bernie Sanders being the nominee. I think everyone in this town has pretty much accepted that Joe Biden is the guy. And Democrats in swing districts are happy about that because he's not seen as radical or as crazy as Bernie is by the middle of the road swing voters. So do we have a chance? Absolutely. Is it going to be tough? Yes, it is. But I think in an election year where the president is popular, and we've just gone through this impeachment.
Yes.
We've just gone through this impeachment. I think the president, up until about a week ago, life was really good. But now we've got this coronavirus issue. I suspect, like many crises that the president has been involved in, he'll lead us through this. And 3 or 4 or 5 months from now, he'll be declaring victory, and it'll help him going into an election year. But the truth of the matter is that no one, you, me, or anyone knows what the future holds. We don't know how the economy is going to be in a few months. We don't know if this virus really is going to kill 3% of the population. I mean, my God, can you imagine if millions of people die from this in the United States? The way people see their government may totally change forever. I don't know. I don't know the answer. There's so many unknown factors. But the answer to your original question, do we have a chance to take back the House? The answer is absolutely yes. Does Nancy Pelosi have a chance to remain the Speaker? And the answer is absolutely yes.
Yeah.
Anything is on the table.
It's actually really, really interesting. It's going to be an interesting next few months. Now, before we get to some of the juice stuff, it's kind of funny in so many ways how it's a constant blame of media, sensationalizing things. But I look at it more as social media has been so interesting with President Trump in office in terms of people make such a big deal about his tweets, right? But I really love it, and I love what a lot of the right side of the House and Senate are doing with Twitter and everything else, because I take it as just kind of a gaffe. Like, it's almost like a middle finger back to Twitter. Like, everybody's just having a little bit of fun with everybody, and people take it so, like they make such a big deal of everything. Like, Junior now wants to go against Biden's son in a debate. Like, we both know it's never going to happen. It's funny cannon fodder, and for whatever reason, I don't understand why the left can't take that for what it is. Like, it's just, the social media sphere, I feel so many people just take themselves way too seriously on it. Like, I feel like President Trump's somewhere in his chair, like, I'm going to throw this out there. People get a kick out of this. And that's what it's supposed to be, right? Like, why?
Yeah, the standards are lessened. For people that are active in the social media sphere know that your normal communication norms are not the same. But when people that aren't really engaged in that get a whiff of it, they say things that don't make sense to the rest of us. A very simple example is I put something out on social media in casual talk, and one of my fellow Republicans back home, she said, "Why would you say Trump? Why wouldn't you say President Trump?" And normally I would say, you would spell out President Trump. But when you're kind of doing not full sentences, little things, people don't get it. Like the rest of us do. But it's interesting. Social media has made the president more accessible than any other president. And if a Democrat was in office and as accessible as President Trump has been, and as open to the American people and able to communicate freely, they would praise this great, wonderful Democrat president. I mean, they would just be falling over themselves saying how a man of the people, accessible he is. Or she is. But because it's President Trump and they hate President Trump, everything he does is just terrible for them. So it's really interesting. I think it's a combination of they hate how accessible he is. They hate the idea that a billionaire from New York is considered a man of the people, which he is. It's so incredible. It doesn't make sense to people on the Democratic side. It wouldn't have made sense to me when the president first started running. Most Republicans couldn't have imagined a billionaire from New York who owns hotels around the world to actually appeal to so many different classes and types of people from all backgrounds like this president has. But he has such broad appeal from all areas of American life. It's what I think will help get him reelected, and it drives Democrats crazy.
Yeah, and if you know the family, which I know a couple of them pretty decently, if you know the family and you know how they are, they're just working the room, and they're just kind of doing their thing. And they are always willing to listen, and they are always willing to chat it up and spend some time with you. I mean, it's interesting how it's played out, but I always got a kick. The Democrats were always the darlings of Hollywood and always the darlings of anything media, right? They were always in this position of being the darlings. And I just love that the right side of the building has managed to take over social media, which is so leftist in so many ways, but they've managed to kind of, come out there and almost, give the middle finger to it or thumb their nose at it, like you said, with short speak and everything else. It doesn't always have to be this big, long-winded soliloquy of this tome of greatness that you're putting out there. You're just like you had a tweet one time, that we had a huge week, it's like all tongue in cheek, it's all, it's like, it's fun. It's meant to be fun. Like, let's not take ourselves so seriously here. Let's back the train up a little bit. But I love that. And that's one of the things that kind of caught my eye with some of your tweets and some of the stuff you put out there. It's kind of like, I'm doing serious business here, but at the same time, I can bring you up to speed and still have a laugh. I mean, we can all take a step back here. Now, did it shock you?
But by the way, my Twitter handle is at Lance Gooden, LanceGooden. We're kind of new to Twitter. I got to Congress without having ever tweeted anything.
Crazy. We're going to get to that.
So then I got here and I thought, well, I got here without Twitter. Do I have to have Twitter to stay here? And my staff said, yes, you do have to have it. And then so we've started using it, and it's a great way to communicate and kind of let your voice be heard.
It's
so
a fun
I
tool.
appreciate you mentioning
it's a fun tool. Yeah, you got to check out this Twitter. He's got some great reposts and some great shares on there. But did it shock you that the Democratic field, before we get to the juicy stuff, did it shock you that the field got narrowed down to two old white rich guys? No pun intended.
I mean, how perfect is that, right?
Mm-hmm.
The two old white rich guys from the party that looks down their nose at the rest of us because they accuse us of being run by a bunch of old white guys in the Republican Party. And then what do? They push out the minorities. They push out the females. And now they've got two old white rich guys. I mean, it's classic. Just,
surreal.
It's hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. We've been preached to by these Democrats, at least as long as I've been in Congress and well before, about how they are the party of the people. They are the diversity champions.
Yeah.
But look at who their standard bearers are. It's ridiculous.
Oh, it's insanity, and I get a big kick out of the messaging and just kind of what that says about them. I thought they had a terrific candidate in Tulsi Gabbard, and they ran her out of town. You know, she's still in it, but you know what I mean. They kind of just brushed her off, and you know, it's so fitting that it would go down that narrative. But as this kind of unfolds, we have an interesting situation where we know it's going to be Biden. Let's, say it what it is.
Right.
Bernie's going to ride it out to the end and try to get his piece of the pie, but we know it's going to be Biden. And Biden recently names Beto O'Rourke his gun czar. And here we go with the anti-2A thing again. Here it comes. Mm-hmm. Do you find that timing very strange and very interesting? Because I do.
I honestly think that this was a campaign gaffe by Joe Biden. Because I got to believe when he said that Beto O'Rourke is going to be my gun guy in Washington, that all of the Biden supporters, campaign staff, the experts running his show, certainly his biggest supporters back in Texas, who I know that have come out for him, I know they all thought to themselves, even if they love Beto, they thought, why would he say that? Beto is so unpopular now, especially in Texas and states that they are counting on going blue. Virginia, for example. Beto is such an enemy to the Second Amendment. And you've got a guy in Joe Biden that's going to be wanting to appeal to Second Amendment supporters in places like Virginia and Ohio and Pennsylvania, Florida. And having Beto attached to him in any way, I think, just immediately poisons anyone that values their Second Amendment rights.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking, I might vote for a Democrat, I don't like the way such and such is going, and Joe Biden doesn't seem to be totally against gun rights, well, you're no longer thinking that if he's aligning himself with Beto.
Yeah. I said earlier on a podcast with a congressional candidate and with a different candidate prior to that, I said, here's the problem. This is the major issue. You have a lot of people making decisions around this gun debate that really don't fully understand what they're doing, or they don't understand who owns gun shops, and they don't understand who is involved in this debate. They don't understand the laws that they make. So California being a prime example, Chicago, Illinois being another one. They create these laws where they want to augment or change things on the gun, which never fixes anything because there's always a workaround. And they're involved in a process where the people they're hurting are FFL owners, which essentially are small mom and pop businesses that I know there's a million of them all over Texas because I've spent a lot of time down there in my industry. And small gun shops and gun ranges, they're hurting the exact people that they want to vote for them. And they don't understand the laws that they're making or the process that they're going through because they don't care to learn. Beto O'Rourke believes, and I said this to another candidate, Beto O'Rourke believes that he's actually going to create a law in his perfect world that will involve law enforcement kicking in the doors of people's houses and taking their guns. That will never happen on U.S. soil. That will never happen in the United States ever in a million years.
That's right.
It will never happen. And if he took a moment to sit down with local law enforcement or sit down with chiefs or went and spoke to a board of chiefs or sheriffs or even talked to somebody like yourself and got a little educated, he would understand that will never happen on U.S. soil, ever.
Right.
And why does he have that roadblock? Why can't they create a panel or create a board or create somebody to advise this guy and say, listen, you need to adjust your messaging because you're never going to get elected into a mainstream election with that type of messaging.
I think he just screwed up. I will be shocked I'll be happy to admit that I was wrong, because this will be an admission that will mean that President Trump is even closer to being reelected. But I will be shocked if Joe Biden is palling around with Beto and running around the U.S. on a campaign of wanting to take away your guns. I'll be really shocked if I see them on stage together again, unless Beto does something to change his perception. But I mean, he polls so badly in Texas. Even Democrats think he's too extreme, and I don't know what Joe Biden was thinking. I love it. I'm happy he did. From a campaign perspective, it's good for us on the Republican side for him to be labeled an extreme Beto anti-gun guy. But I don't know what his plan is. I feel like he perhaps thought he needed Beto to win in Texas. There are people that think that having Beto on your side means that you're going to do well in Texas. And that may have been the case until that day down in Houston or wherever it was that Beto said he was going to come and take your guns. The perception of Beto in Texas is forever changed after his presidential run, where he went so far left.
And even recently, Biden, was it 4 hours ago, you may or may not know this, in a Detroit plant, some guy approached him that worked in a Michigan factory and said, you know, you're trying to take my Second Amendment away. And Biden answered him, you're full of shit.
Yeah, I did see that. And the sad thing is I don't know that Biden really believes everything that the far left says with respect to guns, because he's been historically not as anti-gun as some of his other Democratic colleagues. But his problem is he's aligned himself with the extreme left, like the Betos of the world, and he's going to have a hard time shaking that perception that he is not going to get into office and then just bow down to Michael Bloomberg or whoever it is that's spent a ton of money to help him get there, that is totally against guns. I mean, if Mike Bloomberg drops the billions of dollars that he promised he would drop in this fight against Donald Trump, and God forbid Joe Biden were to win, it's reasonable to think that Mike Bloomberg is going to have some pretty hefty influence on gun policy in the White House.
You know, you're absolutely correct, and that's the scary thought. But here's the $1 million question, and I can talk to you. You're a Texas guy. You get it. You've shot guns. You understand the Second Amendment. I said this earlier. How do we fix this? What's the path to getting proper gun legislation, proper Second Amendment rights? I said this earlier to Catalina when I was on her congressional candidate. I said, what has to be done is the gun permit needs to be issued like a driver's license, and we have to have national reciprocity, because the problem with the permitting process is, everybody knows, you go and you take a class, potentially, if you're in a non-constitutional carry state, you take a class given to you by maybe a foreign law enforcement, former mill guy, or NRA certified instructor. You get a piece of paper. You take that piece of paper to your chief. The chief then signs off on you getting the permit, and then the permit's issued by the state. So the responsibility is all over the place. I think you have to issue it like a national license. And I said, as far as the NFA goes and everything, why can't you buy a suppressor or an NFA item right at the gun counter? It's a registered serialized item anyway. Pay the stamp right there and go home with the product. I don't understand to me, it doesn't make sense. To me, the solutions are very simple. If everybody gets in a room with the right board or panel, which needs to be constructed of gun owners or executives or people in the community, and they need to sit down and create a proper system for all this. But what's your solution? How do we fix this?
Well, first of all, we should have passed much of the ideas that you're talking about when we had control of both houses. There is no good excuse for why we didn't pass these reciprocity bills when we had control of Congress less than 2 years ago. The fact that I have had this happen. One of my constituents in Texas took a road trip. They forgot that they had the gun in their car. They just totally forgot. And I know there are people that can't imagine, how could you forget you have a gun in your car? It's like forgetting that you had a pin, and you don't think about having your gun until you need your gun. You don't think about that you have sunglasses in your car until the sun is bright. And that sounds so crazy to people in places like California. I understand why that would sound crazy to you if you're listening from one of these states like Washington or California. But in Texas, it's just so common. We have our gun. Yes, it's secured. It's not like we left it in a pile of toys in the floorboard for the kids to play with. My gun is secured in my car. I don't think about it until I might need it. And then I think, okay, let me get the gun. Well, these constituents of mine, they were on a road trip. They didn't even think about it, and they certainly didn't think that it was illegal to have it in a place like New Jersey. They went into an establishment. When they came out, their car had been broken into, and everything had been stolen. And the cops, in writing the report, they were kind of looking around the car. They actually found the handgun that my constituents had secured. The thief that broke the windows didn't even see the gun or take it. And this constituent was arrested and charged for having this gun. My point in mentioning that story is that we need some uniformity around this reciprocity issue. It's crazy that someone who is trained and able to have a gun in many other states can't have them in some states, which is why we should have passed this bill when Republicans had control of both houses in Congress. It's very frustrating.
Yeah, and the airport ones are always the worst stories. You know, people get off the airport secured, everything. I know a guy personally who went through it cost him about $15,000 to eventually get it tossed out. He had a secure firearm, landed at an airport. Because he wasn't allowed to possess it there, the possession then became the issue. You know, he picked it up off the thing, and he said, well, what am I supposed to do? And they're like, well, you could have called the precinct and had them come pick it up. And he's like, I've never even heard of that, you know? And what I always say is did they do it with malice? Was there a malicious intent behind it? He had to spend about $15,000, Congressman, to get that unraveled and to get that figured out. And at the end of the day, and at the end of the day, it was an honest mistake. It wasn't him drunk driving. It wasn't him. He didn't consciously go and drink. He said, look, I had a layover. I was flying into here. I didn't think anything of it. The person at the luggage desk had called it in, and it turned into a whole scuttlebutt. And he was like, look, tell me what to do. I'll do it. And they're like, well, we have to take you in. You possess a firearm. I'm like, what? Like, it doesn't make sense. And what I wish in my dream of dreams with elected officials is I wish they would get people in the room that can share some of these stories, and people can begin to understand that this causes a logjam, not just in the legal system, but also in people's travel and the ability to drive from one range to the other or to maybe commute. Like, I'm still a member at multiple gun ranges all over the country. I have multiple permits, but are there times where I may have done something without malicious intent or driven? You can, in some states, in New Jersey, I mean, if you have a round of ammo visible, they'll lock you up as if you kidnapped 4 kids. And it's like
totally crazy.
It's crazy. So why they can't get in a room and put a coalition together or a group? The Democrats do this all the time. They put 95 coalitions together. Why they can't put a coalition together that can say, look, guys, here's the way the laws work in simple form on the street. Here's the way it plays out. And here's the way it plays out for the citizen owning a firearm. I graduated the police academy many moons ago. I understand the process. And I can tell you right now, just like Bloomberg said, well, my security details, law enforcement trained and da-da-da. I'm going to tell you right now, it doesn't. Gun owner's a gun owner's a gun owner. Whether you have been law enforcement, military, whatever. If you own a gun, you still fall under the same rules unless you fall under LEOSA. So you still fall under the same rules regardless. So they have to create something that makes sense, and they have to create a piece of legislation that makes sense around national reciprocity. I agree with the constitutional carry methodology. Not every state's going to go for that. That's just not going to happen. That's pie in the sky. We all know that. That's the dream. I lived in New Hampshire, live free or die. But the reality is, you have to create something that's like the driver's license system. And I think between the NFA system and the licensing system for permits, it's a little ridiculous. It's out of control. It needs to fall under a simple line like driver's licenses. And I agree with your point. It should have been pushed through when we had the House and the Senate. And I think if we capture it, it's something that absolutely has to be put to the top of the table.
That's true. I'm with you. Totally. We've got to win elections to make it happen, and that's why this November is just so critical for the future of our nation and certainly our Second Amendment rights.
Yeah, and I love that you're championing a lot of these causes, and I love that you have guys coming out like the recent representative that was carrying an AR-15, and I believe he has it in his office. Can you confirm that he has it in his office?
I believe he does, yeah. They tell us that kind of stuff is frowned upon, but there's no rule against it. I think you perhaps get in trouble when you walk off Capitol property, but for the most part, you can you can bring your guns to the Capitol. I'm told I don't, but I wouldn't be opposed to someone else doing it. It's not like it's the worst thing going on in Washington, D.C. Someone's getting stabbed or murdered daily in this town, and it's certainly not by law-abiding gun owners.
Well, I imagine it's a display piece, and he has the pin pulled or something. So, I'm sure that it covers all the laws. But I think that's amazing when guys come out and they're outspoken about it, because one of the things that I've always struggled with is we need to have a voice behind some of this. We always constantly hear about gun legislation and anti-2A legislation and all that. And right now with the NRA post-Ackerman McQueen, where they don't have the ability to have a strong marketing arm behind them, it really falls on the responsibility of the elected officials to get out there, have a voice, and say, look, we're not making legislation that makes sense. We're not pushing bills through or anything that makes sense for this. And it's always going to be a horse trade. And I try to explain this to people on the street because they don't understand.
Right.
You're going to have to horse trade. So in no way, shape, or form are we just going to get national reciprocity. So I said to people, I said, look, what's going to happen if it happens is there's going to be national reciprocity, but there's also still going to be the ability for people to have things like city ordinances and things like that. So, for example, in New York, you can't have a firearm in the city. In Boston, you can only have 10 rounds in a magazine. You can only have a 10-round magazine. You're still going to have city ordinances because they're never going to allow people to just walk the street of Boston with an AR-15 strapped to their back. It's not going to happen. So the reality is you're still going to leave room for the allowance of certain city-based restrictions. And, I'm not, I'm heads or tails of it because you're going to have to trade something. So what the trade becomes, I don't know what the horse trade is, but the reality is to everybody listening and to everybody, I'm going to explain this. That's how it's going to go, whether you like it or not. There's going to be some trade in it, whether it's some type of locking mechanism that needs to be used. But you shouldn't be arresting guys, just like you brought up, Congressman. Great point. People that are law-abiding citizens that are locking their guns, but the reality is it just happened to be in their car. That should not be an arrestable offense. Hey, I took the proper precautions. I locked it up. I put it in a secure, box, put it in my trunk, whatever, what have you. At the end of the day, if someone breaks into your trunk and steals it, they're still stealing. That's just the real reality of it. It's still a theft. It's a crime. Whether or not we can debate all day, it's not secure and it's not this and it's not that. We have to come up with something that makes sense. And we have to stop coming up with these laws that say, well, if you remove a button over here and if you, we twist a barrel just this way, if we do something like this, it has to make sense. And the solution...
It's crazy that in some states, they care more about rights for people who are in some cases violent criminals. They care more about the rights of violent criminals who are not even from this country. Right. Illegal immigrant violent criminals have more rights in some states in America than law-abiding gun owners. Your Second Amendment is less valuable in California than an illegal immigrant's right to be there and commit a crime. It's just totally crazy.
It's totally crazy. It's insane. Now, are you working hand in hand with your constituency on, which I know that you are, on solving some of these problems and getting some of this to the next level?
We are, but I'll be honest, from the perspective of a member of the House in the Republican Party with Nancy Pelosi running the House, our focus right now is winning elections, and we've got to win this next election. We've got to have President Trump reelected, and we've got to take back the House, because it is unreasonable if any Republican in Congress tells you they're going to get something passed on the president's desk that's going to protect the rights of gun owners in this country, then they're delusional, because as long as Democrats control the House, we will not get anything done. And in fact, just the opposite could happen. And so we've got to win and be victorious in November, and that's our absolute number one focus. Had we won and kept the House this last cycle, then we wouldn't be having this conversation, because we would have already passed reciprocity, and all these things would be on the president's desk, which is why we've got to take back the House in November. It just absolutely must happen.
I agree. What districts and what candidates excite you? Do you have any out there that you get your eye on?
One in particular that is a neighbor of mine in Dallas, Genevieve Collins. She's running in a seat that was once held by Pete Sessions and now is held by Colin Allred. She's working hard. She won the nomination. There were multiple candidates in the race last week in Texas, and she won without a runoff the nomination. So she's moving forward in November. Wesley Hunt down in Houston, also running against a swing district Democrat freshman in a very close district. So we've got the candidates. Republicans are united more than they've ever been, but we've got to close the deal, and we've got to get the president elected. And I think the future looks bright, but we've got to win in November.
Yeah, it's going to be a wild ride into November. And I agree with you, the point you brought up earlier. I think that Biden-Beto thing was a little bit of a gaffe. I just don't know if they're going to be able to backpedal and find their way out of it. Do you think Biden's going to be able to, and it's just more a perspective. I know everybody's made a big to-do about his memory, his health, all those things. Do you really think there's something there to that?
I don't know. I certainly don't think he's as sharp as he used to be. And there's no debating that he is certainly on up there in years. But I don't know. I think people can get away with a whole lot more than they used to could in politics. And if you've got him and the president going at it, whether in person or on Twitter, I think that the news cycle is so short and the threshold for offensiveness is so low that you can get over things. You can get by with things that perhaps you couldn't in the past. And the other thing is people are so used to Biden's gas that him saying something silly today is really not that shocking. I feel like people are going to just kind of accept him as someone who says crazy stuff.
Yeah, I'm like the most rational dude out there when it comes to that stuff. I'm like, look, maybe he has a stutter, as he mentioned, Okay, I get that. Maybe he has these couple lapses. These guys are on planes. They're bouncing around everywhere. Like, we're all reasonable, right? But at some point, you're kind of like, okay, like, this is getting a little scary. Like, there's been a couple times where I'm like, uh-oh, like, this is a problem. Yeah. And I think that the antenna is up. Whether or not somebody's ready to make a medical call on this, I don't know. But the intent, I would say the radar is fairly up, just to be honest.
Yep. Well, I can promise you no one on the Democrat side is going to say one thing about it between now and the election. So I think we've just got to – I think we can beat him on the merits, and the merits are not winning arguments for Democrats.
Right.
His policies are bad. He's certainly not as extreme as Bernie Sanders, which Democrats are loving it, that they're going to finally be done with Bernie Sanders. But he's definitely got his baggage, and I think it'll be a fun campaign to watch. There's no telling what's going to go on between now and November.
Why are the Democrats so ganged up against Bernie, in your opinion?
He represents the far left of the party. The people that are coming out and endorsing him, like Rashida Tlaib and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, these are the up-and-comers that are much farther left than your establishment Democrat types. They're even further left than Maxine Waters and Nancy Pelosi. People like Nancy and Maxine, I don't think particularly enjoy watching the far left take over their party. And I think that Bernie Sanders very much appeals to that demographic of the party, the far left, the extreme socialists. And I think that they know that Republicans campaigning against the new Socialist Democratic Party is a winning message for us. And I think they're trying to get away from that. And they're trying to say we've elected someone that's much more middle of the road, not extreme like Bernie Sanders, which is why they're so much rallying around Joe Biden. Do they think he's the best candidate to be that middle of the road Democrat? No, but it's who they're stuck with. And so that's why you're seeing this rallying around Joe Biden on the Democratic side. Yeah,
it's interesting because, Bernie, you would have thought would have had this huge outpouring, the young vote, everything. And, President Trump totally decimated him on that, which was interesting to me because I said, all right, he'll get a lot of the progressive. Do we feel like initiatives like Turning Point USA and things that Charlie's doing and certain things out there are kind of beginning to slowly turn the tide and allow free thinking into some of these colleges and in some of these institutions?
Perhaps.
We hope.
I'd like to think so. Yeah, we hope so. In my district where I live, we've got a lot of young people. We still can't seem to get them out to vote, and so it's a struggle. We're working on it, and I don't think anyone should be discouraged that is trying to help the cause. So, if someone wants to do something to help us win in November, even if another group of conservatives thinks that it's not a great use of time, I would say let's don't discourage anyone who is working to help us be victorious in the next election.
I look at a guy like you, and we're in a similar age group. You and I kind of, came of age at the same time. We're about the same age. And it's really exciting to me, and it's been, really great to rap with you for a little bit. It's fun to see people who grew up in the same, like I think of myself as an 80s, early 90s baby, and to come up in that time and start to come of age, and a lot of the ideas and the things that I'm passionate about, you're passionate about. Do you feel you can lead this charge of young, potentially super young? I just got off the phone with Catalina, who's 26 years old. You mentioned Genevieve, super young candidates. Do you feel you could be the guy that can help bridge the gap and lead these young hopefuls into the next steps and what we can do in the next 10 and 15 years? Because this is becoming our time.
Yeah, it is. And I don't want to say that I'm the only guy, but I think there's a lot of us in the younger crowd of Congress that are trying to do that. And so I think that it's going to be a team effort, but I certainly think we're making progress. I don't want to say that it's going to take things to really get bad before they get better, because I don't want that to happen. I want things to continue to get better. But young people are going to have to wake up, and I think that the current president, certainly speaks to the young people I represent more so than Bernie Sanders does. And we've got to make sure we're appealing to the younger voters and not leaving them behind, because the temptation is to kind of gear toward those seniors that always vote. And yes, they're important too, but we've got to get more people involved in the Republican Party. And I think we're doing that. Certainly easier to do that in Republican stronghold areas where the Republican Party is not the devil. You go to places like California and you really feel bad for Republicans that live in California, because life is just very difficult. If you're a Republican in California, they're nasty. Not Republicans, but Democrats are just nasty to Republicans in places like California. It's very interesting. It's even in Texas and some of the strong Democrat areas, the vitriol, your Bernie Sanders type that will just get in your face and go crazy. It's very disturbing, some of the things we're seeing, and in California especially, they are celebrating the decline of the Republican Party, and that's got to be turned around.
Yeah, it's a scary time for sure, and I think it's going to be, California's going to be a tough one, Congressman. It's going to be a tough one to turn and to get, I don't know how to do it. And a lot of them, I'm going to come out and say it. I know, you may or may not. They're moving out of there and they're moving into these other states, and they're like, infiltrating some of these states, and it's really brutal. We see it here in Nevada. This is a radical extreme side of the Democratic Party we have not seen. I'm not used to in Massachusetts and in New England, because in New England you got the limousine liberals. They're not exactly the same type of Democrats. I mean, this is a very radical side of the party that's actually, I'm going to be quite frank, it's scary. It's a scary side, and I'm not excited to see that type of power come to fruition in any way, shape, or form, because I think they're totally out of touch with reality.
I agree, and November will tell you and me whether or not we're right.
Now, I know time's tight for you, so my last question. We're both from the same era, so do you view yourself as a millennial? I don't, and I'm going to tell you why. I don't see it that way, because I can remember a time when we didn't have cell phones. In high school, I never had a cell phone. And I know they just came to be. Everybody had like those crazy Nokias when we were in, so do you remember, do you consider, we're right on the line, you and I, we're like kind of right there.
Yeah, I'm kind of, if I am a millennial, by definition I am, but I'm certainly at the very top end, about to be too old. But I remember payphones. Yep. I remember getting phone cards loaded up with minutes that you would use to call from a payphone. I remember gas being very cheap, as in 50 cents a gallon. I remember when stamps were a quarter. How crazy is that?
And your first car barely ran.
And I remember when the internet was really first in the homes of everyone, when you had the dial-up and it took forever and it was slow. So, yeah, some days I feel like a millennial. Some days I feel super old. So
It's crazy.
It depends on the day, I guess.
Yeah.
It is crazy.
It's crazy because, I always tell people by definition, just as you said, I am based on somebody's Wikipedia definition. But based on life, I don't feel as if I am because I didn't send my first text message really till I was well into college. And that was when I got my first cell phone. So I still was able to hold a conversation with somebody without getting the fidgets to reach for the phone. So, I'm happy that there's a guy like you in Congress that can represent that era and understand that. So I appreciate you, and I appreciate you taking the time. Can you let everybody know where to find you and where to reach out to you?
Sure. I'm on Twitter at Lance Gooden, and then on Facebook at Lance Gooden for Texas. And we're here in Washington every week doing the business of the people when I'm not back home in East Texas with my wife and 2 children. And I always love to be back home. So looking forward to getting back this weekend. And again, with the coronavirus, we don't know if we're going to continue to be here in Washington as regularly. But so far, Speaker Pelosi has indicated that is the case. But I really appreciate you having me. Thank you very much.
I appreciate you taking the time, Congressman. It's been amazing. I love Texas. Every time I visit the DFW area, I really have enjoyed my time there. I've gone on some great hunts, had an awesome time in that Fort Worth area and in Dallas, and I've really enjoyed everything in that great state. I think you're going to do a fantastic job, and it's great to have somebody that represents my generation coming from Texas, and I really feel like you're a voice that I think my generation could be proud of, our generation can be proud of. So I really appreciate you taking the time to kind of chime in and give your support, and you're welcome back anytime.
Well, I appreciate that. And as I hang up on my Motorola flip phone, I will say thank you, and I hope to visit with you again soon.
Yes, sir. If you ever make it out to the great state of Nevada, please don't hesitate. I really appreciate you taking the time.
I'd love that. Thank you so much. Good luck to you. Thanks for all you do.
Thank you, sir.